For more on Canada's role in the refugee crisis, we are joined now by Conservative candidate and the Minister of Immigration, Chris Alexander. He's joining us live from Ajax, Ontario. Minister Alexander, we appreciate your time. We just heard from Premier Selinger there saying he thinks we could double the amount that Canada has promised. What's your response to other political leaders saying we could do more than what we're doing?
We agree that we need to do more, that this crisis is without precedent, that we need to accelerate the processing times and the arrival of Syrians in Canada. That's why we put in place way back in January a plan to bring 10,000 Syrians to Canada in the next couple of years. We are far from hitting that goal. We call on private sponsors across the country, municipalities, provinces, and territories to join us in this, to put partisanship aside, and to come together as Canadians to do one of the things this country does best, which is resettle refugees from dangerous places. And there is no cap on the number of refugees that can be privately sponsored from Syria. We are welcoming larger numbers and have thousands of applications since we made that big announcement in January. As you know, the Prime Minister doubled our commitment in the course of this election campaign. A re-elected Conservative government would now be seeking to resettle up to 20,000 Syrians. There's no other country actually that has an objective like that for the resettlement of refugees, which is the organized selection, processing, and transport of refugees from camps and where they are in the region to here. Very different from the irregular migration and asylum seeking that we're seeing in Europe today. This is the way to go. Canada's committed to do a lot. We want to see other countries emulate our very honorable track record in this area. We're also the only country in the world that has private sponsorship in order to make tax dollars go further and ensure that refugees succeed when they arrive in Canada. The track record of privately sponsored refugees is very strong, as we saw from the days of the Vietnamese boat people through to today. Yeah, and it seems that the private sponsorships are how most Syrian refugees have come to Canada already. Out of the more than 2,000 Syrian refugees since 2013, a major part of that is from the private sponsorship. So when it comes to the government procedure, how can you accelerate those applications? Well, we are accelerating on both sides. We want the government to do its part. We are taking on the government side some of the most vulnerable, some of those who are literally facing persecution or loss of life if a country like Canada doesn't take them. And we're trying to process those applications much faster. It used to be a couple of years to process these government-assisted refugee applications. Now we're doing it in as little as 6 months. We've increased our capacity on the ground in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Turkey to take on a bigger load. But Canada's generosity goes further when we get cities, sponsorship agreement holders, towns, families involved. Church parishes, for example, do an amazing job of bringing Syrians and Iraqi refugees here and turning their stories into successes. Keep in mind, we have brought over 20,000 Iraqi refugees to this country in the last few years. So we have an overall target for victims of this conflict, victims of the terrorism in Iraq and Syria, of 50,000 refugees to be resettled by roughly 2018. We're halfway through that already. And if we get more private sponsors, if we come together across party lines, cities, towns, families, church groups, other faith groups, we will get this done quickly, and we will be doing one of the things, as I say, that Canada does best, which is resettle refugees. We spoke with an immigration lawyer in Vancouver who said that just a few years ago, Canada decided that in order to apply for refugee status, the United Nations or a third party would have to deem someone a refugee first, as opposed to the Canadian government deciding whether someone's a refugee or not. That immigration lawyer said if that was lifted, that changed from 2012, it would be much easier for people to apply for immigration here, including Mohammed Kurdi, Tima Kurdi's brother in Germany. Sure. Well, let's be clear about the actual rules. I mean, historically with refugees, it has taken a UN designation to make them eligible for resettlement. Canada is the country that resettles 1 in 10 of those with that UN designation who go anywhere in the world every year. We do more of this per capita than any other country. But recognizing the scale of the Syrian crisis, that there are 4 million Syrians outside of their country right now, only a very small number who have refugee designation from the United Nations. We allow sponsorship agreement holders, 100 groups across the country that sponsor refugees with us, to take people without that designation. And they are doing that. There are thousands of applications in from them. And they will work with individual families, with groups of 5, to let them sponsor people without the official UN Convention refugee status under their umbrella. So we encourage people, as I say, to come together. These groups are more numerous than ever. They're all across the country. And the list is on our website at Canada.ca under immigration.
Since the image of Alan Kurdi appeared on social media everywhere, and you returned to Ottawa, to the ministry to deal with this situation, has anything changed?
Well, I think a lot has changed.
I'm sorry, I mean
with
Canada's stance on the handling of the refugee crisis.
Yeah, well, first, we've all been heartbroken by those images, by the story that we all now know in detail of the Kurdi family, how they fled Damascus, how they fled a terrorist assault on the region of Kobane, and how they desperately sought to bring their families to start a new life. And initially, there was a report that an application had been made by Abdullah, his children, his wife, to Canada. That was not the case. Mohammed's family had made an application.
It was for his brother Mohammed.
So we know those facts. But what has changed is that we are now, as a country, seeing much more clearly how huge this crisis is, how painful it is and tragic it is for families like the Kurdis, and that we need to do more to respond. We've had a large-scale refugee resettlement commitment since January. I think what this crisis has done is brought many, many more Canadians to the point where they say, we want our organization to help, we want our family to help, and we are working as government to make sure that we respond to that goodwill and to that action that Canadians are taking. We're reducing the processing time. It is 11 months for Syrian applications. We are seeing it with some of our most established sponsorship agreement holders come down to 6 months. We have reduced the length of the application forms. And as I say, we're trying to be able to reach all of those Syrians in need. You don't have to have a UN Convention refugee designation to be sponsored by one of the 100 groups across Canada. And I am hearing from many of them every day that they want to do more. There's absolutely no cap at the moment on the number of applications they can submit. And we encourage them to keep doing that. And to be backstopped and supported by their cities and towns, by church groups, by faith groups, by any and all Canadians who care, because we do care.
Well, CBC News has spoken to a family who has someone who has been accepted, and the wait that they've been told is 42 months. So if there's any acceleration there, I'm sure that family would appreciate it. Minister, I do have to ask you about comments shared between your campaign office and Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi. He had some critical words for the government's response to this unfolding crisis. We want to play a clip of the Calgary mayor. He was wondering whether airstrikes in Syria to fight ISIS are really the answer here. Let's listen to Mayor Nenshi.
Canadians are saying, you know what? The talking point of if we only defeat ISIS, then this problem will go away is not resonating with people. Because I think Canadians are saying it's fair to ask, is that working? Has the refugee crisis gotten better since we started the air strikes? And in reality, regardless of the rest of it, no one is saying you bring in the refugees and that solves the whole problem.
What do you say to that, Minister?
Well, I'd like to bring the example of Afghanistan. 5 million refugees left because of terrorism, because of a civil war. They only went home when the Taliban fell, and there was international support for them to go home. 4 million of them went home. It is irresponsible to talk about a response to this crisis only in terms of resettling refugees. Canada is doing its part. Canada is hoping others will emulate what we're doing in resettling refugees. We are a top donor in meeting the needs of millions in camps, but we also need to keep fighting ISIS on the ground. This is a terrorist threat on a much larger scale than we ever saw in Afghanistan. These are groups that are victimizing and butchering hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and Syrians since the beginning of those conflicts. They are eliminating religious and ethnic minorities in many cases from the face of the earth. It is inconceivable for Canada and Canadians, with our traditions of principled action in the world, to stand aside from this completely. That's why we're taking part in a military mission under the leadership of President Obama, with our key European allies and with Arab allies. It's the right thing to do, and it is absolutely in Canada's best traditions. We have never, when crises of this scale have unfolded, chosen to do humanitarian response and not respond on the security side. There is no exclusivity here. We need to do both, and that's why we are committed to doing both. And a Conservative government will continue to do that, in stark contrast to what the other parties are saying, I'm afraid, on the military side.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. We do appreciate you making yourself available to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the
That
best.
is Conservative candidate and Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, Chris Alexander, joining us live from Ajax, Ontario.